Hello and welcome. You're watching NDTV. I'm Rishika Barwa. As India gets set to roll out the COVID-19 vaccines, there is a new rapidly spreading UK strain that's here. There are over 90 cases in India and counting. We've resumed travel to the UK, but are we really prepared to deal with the onslaught of this new strain that has locked down the UK all over again? Where are we today in our fight against the coronavirus? As always, Dr. Randeep Guleria, the head of AIIMS, joins us. Thanks so much, Dr. Guleria, for sparing the time of day and being with us. I want to begin by asking you about, India resuming travel to the UK. More questions and answers, really. The UK has recorded its highest COVID cases and deaths. It's in a complete state of lockdown. Is this really the best decision?
So I think we need to be very careful. UK is not in a very good position right now. And they're really, in many ways, doing things which are more or less like a panic situation. But we need to be careful. We are in a much better position in terms of number of cases and our case fatality rate. Therefore, I think 2 or 3 things are important. One is to be very vigilant. This strain is no longer restricted to UK. We must understand that there are cases now being reported in Europe also, in other parts of the country. And the fact that this strain was reported in September means that there are chances that this may have spread to other parts of the world even before UK really raised the red flag in December. Therefore, one step could be being careful as far as incoming flights from UK is concerned and having a strict quarantine. But I think we must also have a very aggressive surveillance to make sure that we are able to pick up any abnormal signal in our own country of a cluster of cases or sudden increase in the number of cases.
Yes.
And we already have set up a big network, a consortium of looking at gene sequencing to pick up this strain if it happens. We need to aggressively do that so that we can see whether this strain is already present in India. And secondly, if we have an abnormal cluster or group of individuals who are not behaving as our current trend is, then we can take aggressive measures to contain it.
Right. The reason why this question is so worrying is because the London mayor yesterday said that the city is at a critical point. He said this publicly, that 1 out of 30 Londoners actually have the COVID-19 infection. And in terms of the peak, in terms of the number of cases, it's 35% higher than what it was during the peak in 2020. So, is India really prepared to deal with the onslaught of this strain, God forbid, if we are to see a spike in numbers again?
So, this is going to be a big challenge if the strain comes back because of multiple factors. One is that we will again have to sort of go back to what we were doing a few months ago in terms of our resources. We have started cutting down on our COVID resources so that non-COVID care can start. That will have to change dramatically. Also, it will put a lot of strain on healthcare workers who are already in sort of having COVID fatigue. So one hopes that this doesn't happen and we work aggressively in our surveillance system and really containing the infection if it is happening in certain parts of our country, rather than letting it spread and then trying to have mitigation measures which are hospital-based.
Right. In terms of what India is doing currently after we've resumed travel with the UK, there's an RT-PCR test on arrival for all UK passengers. But Dr. Guleria, what about the incubation period? You've said it on the broadcast here several times that there is a 7-day incubation period at the minimum that needs to be considered. So, should multiple tests therefore be done?
So what could be done is that those who are negative still need to be in quarantine for at least 7 to 10 days. And if they are symptomatic, they should either be tested or we otherwise test them to make sure that they are not in the incubation period and are have not missed the initial, or have the infection but missed the initial positive report of the previous test. So we need to develop a strategy so that we are doubly sure, because we must remember that if one test does not really guarantee that you are going to be negative, you may be in the incubation period and your viral load may be very low and you may be negative but turn out to be positive a few days later.
Right. So what you're essentially saying is that even those passengers who are testing negative on arrival need to be quarantined, and if they develop symptoms, then they need to be retested.
Yes, that would be the ideal thing that we could do, because even if you're negative on arrival, you still may be in the incubation period and you may develop
Absolutely.
symptoms after about 5 to 7 days. Therefore, all individuals coming should either self-quarantine themselves or be in a quarantine facility. And if they have symptoms, and probably be followed up by the healthcare workers. And if they have symptoms, they should be immediately tested, and one should then look for whether they have the variant strain or not.
Right. Is 7 days of mandatory institutional quarantine, which is what the rule currently says for passengers arriving from the UK, is that enough?
So for most people, it will be enough, because usually by the 5 to 7 days, you will develop symptoms. It's not a foolproof thing, because you can even have your incubation period can be even up to 10 to 12 days or longer. So, but for the majority, it is all right. But I would say that even after that, if you have any symptoms, you must isolate yourself and get yourself tested.
All right. Let's just shift our focus to the India vaccine story. I think that's what everyone's really waiting for. We've tested the vaccine rollout plan, not once, but twice. When will the vaccine finally be available? That's the million-dollar question.
So I think the vaccine is just around the corner. 2 or 3 things need to be resolved. One is the logistics, so that all states are on board and it's decided how much is going to go to each state. Remember, in the initial part, there is going to be some degree of prioritization, because it's not going to be available for everyone. And even in the priority group, it will have to be staggered to some extent. So once that is sort of resolved and then the distribution process is worked out, I think within a week we should be rolling out the vaccine. At least the first group should get vaccinated. But the whole process is going to take quite some time.
So before our next interview with you, Dr. Guleria, would the vaccine rollout have happened?
I am quite confident that it would have happened.
Okay, one sincerely hopes so too. The other big question, and a lot of our viewers have actually written in and asked this, is how can the common man register for the vaccine at the moment? We understand it's healthcare workers first, then frontline workers, then the elderly, then those with comorbid conditions. What about the common healthy person who wants the vaccine?
So the first group is going to be the priority group, and as you rightly said, it's basically 3 or 4 groups, if you want to put it that way. One is, of course, the frontline workers, the healthcare workers, and the third is those who are over the age of 50 with or without comorbidities, and then is those those individuals who are less than 50 years but have comorbidities, which makes them at a higher risk of getting more severe COVID-19 infection. So that is going to be the first group, and if one is not in that group and is in a low priority group, then you will have to wait for some time, because once this group is vaccinated, and this is around 30 crores, then one will be able to say that you can register, and then your turn would come. For those who fall into this group, the mechanism, of course, the government is working on doing a lot of database being uploaded itself. The healthcare worker database has already been given by states and by the central government, which can be uploaded onto the platform. The frontline worker database is also there from states and the central government. We have the electoral roll for individuals over the age of 50, and that will be also used to identify individuals who are over the age of 50 and need to be vaccinated. But if someone is left out, then there is a mechanism that he can register himself on the CoWIN platform by showing or uploading his identity card, which could be an Aadhaar card, it could be your voter ID card, it could be your passbook, it could be passport. There's a whole list of things that can be uploaded, and with your mobile number, and you will get an OTP, and then subsequently you will be registered. And on that mobile number, you will get to know when is your date for the vaccination and where you have to come.
But when is that date? I think that's the other crucial question for the average person who doesn't fall into the priority groups. What's the kind of timeline that we're looking at?
So this is a tough question, because it will depend on the number of doses that we will have available over a period of time. And if we have multiple vaccines, and I'm hopeful that by March we will have more than 2 or 3 companies coming in to provide us the vaccine, we will have even possibly Dr. Reddy's laboratory with the Russian vaccine, the Sputnik 5, and maybe Zydus Cadila with their vaccine, having finished their trial. That will increase the number of doses that we have. That will help us to decide when will we finish our first priority list.
Right.
Hopefully, we can do it in the first 4 to 6 months. But the rate limiting factor are two. One is the number of doses available, and secondly is how do we roll it out multiple times, because we have to give 2 doses.
Yes.
So how do we roll it out multiple times so that everyone who is in the priority group gets covered and gets the second dose also?
Right. We'll talk about Sputnik 5 and Zydus Cadila, subsequently. But Bharat Biotech vaccine was approved without efficacy data, and there was a huge storm that was created. How will we know if Covaxin actually works, because the efficacy data is not known to the public?
So there's immunogenicity data which suggests that it should work. It's very robust, and it's now in the public domain. There is a preprint article also which Bharat Biotech has put out, which regarding the immunogenicity data. But I do agree that the final proof does lie in showing that in clinical trial, phase 3 clinical trial, the efficacy is there.
Right.
That study, I'm hopeful, would be over by February. And we should have data which will be accepted by the regulators, I hope, and by the subject expert committee, if that data is robust enough. And then this vaccine's approval will move up as what Serum Institute has got. Right. This is still in a clinical trial mode.
Yes.
So I'm hopeful that by the time we will be able to do that in the next, let's say, 4 to 6 weeks.
All right, 4 to 6 weeks for the efficacy data is what you're saying. But this brings me to my next question. What does vaccine approval in clinical trial mode mean? And can you break it down for our viewers? Is it safe?
So when we're looking at vaccine approval, it means in many situations, when we talk of approval as an emergency use authorization, it depends on the clinical situation that the approval is being given. And often it is given that you have enough data which suggest that this is effective and it's safe. But we still need more data. So you can start rolling it out, but keep collecting the data one way or the other. And based on that, we will subsequently take a considered opinion. This is what was done for drugs also. For example, we've gone up and down with hydroxychloroquine, with remdesivir, and with so many other drugs as far as COVID-19 is concerned. All of them got emergency use approval based on limited data, right, rather than large studies at that point in time. So if you look at it from that point of view, this is a sort of a, it's not the same thing, I mean, in comparison, but it has the same philosophy behind it. And therefore, I think one is trying to say that if we have, like you just mentioned, a situation like we have in UK, we will need to have more doses. Remember, we don't have an antiviral drug against this virus. There is nothing, we have no treatment as of now, except for supportive treatment and steroids in more severe cases that really actually works. So if we really have to have some sort of a treatment, then one strategy is to increase the immunity that you can among the population and therefore give them protection against the infection. This is a strategy that currently UK is adopting.
Yes.
They've actually started vaccinating, just giving one dose of vaccine to more and more people to actually cause that type of immunity. So as a corollary, we could say that because our number is large, we could have the Bharat Biotech vaccine also given, keeping the data in mind, and that will help us in protecting our individuals from getting the infection.
Right. The Bharat Biotech vaccine, very interestingly, has also been tried in the 12 to 18 age group. Why has no other vaccine been approved for the under 18 age group? Is it a particularly complicated subset?
So in many vaccine platforms are new, and therefore they are not very so for example, the messenger RNA platform that has never been tried as of now the way it is being tried right now. So it's possible that in that platform one would like to have more data on adults over the age of 18 rather than looking at it in younger children. The Bharat Biotech vaccine uses a very standard platform which has been used for decades and is been shown to be safe even in the younger age group. So they were confident in that it can be done, and that is why the age group that they selected based on their database was up from 12 years onwards. We definitely need to have vaccine for the younger age group. I think even there are now trials going on with the other vaccines also. It's going to be important because as schools open, we would like the children are also protected. We don't want that children get the infection at school and then carry it home and give it to their parents or grandparents, that could lead to again a surge in the number of cases.
Right. Bharat Biotech has also sought approval for trials for a nasal vaccine. Now, could this be a game changer? There are many benefits of a nasal vaccine as opposed to an intramuscular one, which is what we're looking at right now.
Yes, so it can be a game changer in multiple ways. One is nasal vaccine gives what we also call mucosal immunity, and therefore the immune response may be better. This is one theory that people have, that it gives a good amount of mucosal immunity because it stimulates the mucosal immune response also, which parenteral vaccines are not able to do. Secondly, it's easy to administer. If you have a nasal spray, you can give it to a large number of people at one go. This is the advantage that was there for what was the live attenuated influenza vaccine. It was given for healthy people, not for people who had comorbidities. But you could go to a school with healthy children, and each of them could just have to take a nasal spray, and they were vaccinated.
Right.
So it makes things much more easier, because then you can deliver this into a large group by just giving a nasal spray and observing them for some time. But we need more data, because the trials have to show that it is safe and it is efficacious.
All right. So, of course, the efficacy and safety is of paramount importance, but it indeed could be a game changer if it does come into the market. The big question, Dr. Guleria, and again, a lot of our viewers have asked this, is Bharat Biotech versus the Serum Institute vaccine. Which vaccine is better for India right now?
In my opinion, both vaccines are better. We need as many vaccines as we can get. We have a huge population. We need to protect them. There is good safety data from both. Both meet the basic standard for efficacy. And then we are just playing around with numbers 60, 70%, 90%. In actual clinical, in terms of ground reality, or when we look at it being given outside clinical trials in the field, these numbers really don't make that much of a difference.
Right.
So I think we should sort of say that we need as many vaccines as we can get. I'm even looking forward to the other vaccines coming in. Because remember, for us to vaccinate even 30 crore people is like vaccinating a large country, even like the population of the US. So this is a huge number that we have to vaccinate. 30 crore means 60 crore doses. This is going to be like vaccinating many countries in Europe. So this is going to be a huge task, and therefore the more doses we have, the better it is going to be, because that will help us to get over this pandemic in a faster manner.
It's very interesting because the Moderna vaccine CEO has claimed that protection that is given by the Moderna vaccine can actually last a couple of years. How long will vaccine immunity last? Do we have any more data than we did when we started off?
So that's a difficult question, because we need more data as far as this is concerned. And this data will depend on multiple factors. One is how much is the immune response, both the cell-mediated immunity, the antibodies, the T cell and the memory cell response, which each vaccine gives. Are we going to have a new generation of vaccines, a second generation vaccines, which may be more effective, which may be just a single shot and may give immunity even lasting for 5 years or so? It's possible that we may have that. And this may be just the first cycle of vaccines that we're developing for COVID-19. The second issue is, how does the virus behave? The virus may over the next few months mutate even more.
Right.
And that may also affect the degree of immunity that the vaccines can give. So I think it's difficult right now to predict the future. One who is confident that the vaccine immunity will last for many months, maybe a year or two. But it's something that only time will tell us how long it will be able to protect us. And that is why we need to have research still very aggressively going on. The science needs to be there, and we need to really be ahead of the virus, because the virus is also trying to survive.
Right. So one doesn't really know the basis of that claim at the moment. But very quickly, I want to go back to the Bharat Biotech and Serum vaccines. Do we know for sure at the moment that they are going to be effective against the UK strain?
So I think if we look at the data which is emerging, and this is not only from Bharat Biotech, Serum Institute, but the data that is emerging from all the vaccine studies suggests that the vaccines have produced antibodies which are effective against different epitopes of the spike protein, and also have a much bigger action. They act on the cell-mediated immunity, like I mentioned. They cause a much more immune response. Therefore, the changes that have already occurred in the UK strain should not really affect
Okay.
the efficacy of the vaccine as of now.
Okay.
Whether the virus will change more over time, especially when there is sort of pressure because of vaccination, is difficult to say. But as of now, I don't think the vaccines are going to really not be effective against the current strain. But we need to see how things evolve and how the variant also evolves over the next few months.
Right. There's a new study that's come out, Dr. Guleria, that actually talks about how, post-COVID and even 6 months after recovering from COVID-19, there is at least one symptom that continues to persist. Do we perhaps now need more SOPs for post-COVID care?
I think we do. We need to have SOPs for what we call acute post-COVID care and then chronic post-COVID care. So a lot of people have what we call the acute post-COVID care that is required. Majority, I would say, which lasts for usually up to 12 weeks, that is up to 3 months, that they will have some symptoms that causes them to have fever, body aches, persisting cough, or some of them will have an inability to concentrate or brain fog and a chronic fatigue syndrome. In a large majority of them, this acute phenomena will actually resolve and they become much better between 6 to 12 weeks. But there is a percentage of individuals who will continue to have some symptoms as long COVID or it is chronic post-COVID. And that is the one that we will have to follow up for a longer period of time. It could be because of organ damage, that there is permanent damage to an organ like the lung, the heart, or it could be some ongoing secondary immune response which causes symptoms like body aches persisting, chronic cough persisting, or still not being able to concentrate. I have some patients who say they start having mood swings which persist for a long time and they're not able to get over that. So there are a lot of neurological, psychological and physical impairments which happen, and some of them persist for more than 3 months.
So while of course we wait for the vaccine, it's also very important to stress on post-COVID care. Thank you so much, Dr. Guleria, for sparing the time and answering our questions so very patiently. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.